I think wine really fits in with great food. It smells and tastes wonderful. It makes food taste better. Food makes wine taste better when it's paired right. The other thing I love to do is grow things, especially grow things you can eat. So the beautiful grapes out here will make a terrific Cabernet. I love that kind of endeavor. You know, I have an orchard at home with all sorts of fruit trees, avocados, oranges, apples, pears. That's really an enjoyable hobby for me, and wine fits right in with that. When I was training to be a doctor and doing my military service, I got to taste a lot of really wonderful wines. I had time to cook and try different wines with my friends, often putting them in brown bags, seeing if we could guess French or American or Italian. There was a drive-up liquor shop in Phoenix, and Jack introduced me to Mouton Rothschild and Chateau Margaux, and from California Ridge Montebello. And I thought, someday when I create a vineyard and hopefully a winery, I'd like to make wines as good as Chateau Margaux and Ridge Montebello. One of my professors said, "You know, Jan, I can see you love food and wine. Most people eat to live, but you live to eat. I can teach you how to make wine. It'll be better than most anything you can buy." So I started making wine with his help, and then with friends. All of a sudden, we were winning best of shows at lots of county fairs. It's got an amazing terroir, especially for Bordeaux varietals. It's one of about 5 places in the world where you can grow great Cabernet Sauvignon, which is often referred to as the king of wines. The Chardonnay can also be excellent here. A lot of places in the world have well-drained soil, but they don't all have this Mediterranean climate and this breeze that comes in the afternoon. All of those things make the terroir for grapes and for wine really special in Napa. I started looking for vineyards. They all seemed kind of expensive, but one day I saw an ad in the San Francisco paper for 41 acres up on the mountain there. Supposedly had great sun exposure, wonderful well-drained soil, and great water. So I started hiring viticulturists to advise me, and they all liked the idea. One of them said, "These grapes are going to be great." So I planted those 41 acres and struggled to sell the first 9 tons, but after people saw how good the grapes were, I had a waiting list. So 4 years later, I started looking for other properties. One day there was an ad on the telephone pole, just a sheet of paper, about 750 acres, pretty close to me, that was for sale. There was no real road to get there. We started to think about how to deal with rocks. The third obstacle was water. So could we find the water to make this happen? I found a water-seeking geologist, and he located 5 spots, and he said, drill in these 5 spots to 300 feet.
And they drilled in 5 spots and ended up failing. And Jan was about ready to hire another geologist. And in the meantime, his friend called him and said, "Jan, listen, I know this guy. He's had really good luck. You might want to have him come out and try. He's a water witch."
And here's a man of science, right? But he really wanted this property, so he thought, why not?
When the well driller told me we should hire a water witch, I looked at him like he was a little crazy. But rather than give up, I hired one.
At the time, he was like, "A water witch? You know, what is that?" And thinking, you know, then they're probably not going to have luck, but it wouldn't hurt.
What the water witch does is they have divining rods. Sometimes they've been made out of willow sticks, sometimes they're metal rods, and they walk around with these rods or sticks, and when they get closer to water, the sticks or rods actually pull their arms together. And I didn't believe it could work. I did some biochemical research at Yale. I said, this is crazy.
He went ahead and he sent him out there, and he spent a lot of time out there. The land goes from like 900 feet to 1900 feet, so he's walking through hills and valleys and all sorts of things. And finally he called Jan, and he was just exhausted.
He said, Doc, I think I found an underground river. And he pointed to the spot and he said, you're gonna find a river right here. At 300 feet, there was still no water. And so I said, this is our last chance. Go to 500 feet.
Almost double the depth of what the geologists had said. They did strike this underground river that turned out to be an amazing supply of water for most of what Jan was going to need at the time. So he bought himself this piece of property and the water, which has been responsible for creating so many of everyone's favorite wines.
My brother and I breathed many sighs of relief, and now Stagecoach has 16 wells, and we can keep almost 1 million grapevines relatively content, even in the rocks, even in a heat wave. So the water was really critical. If that water witch hadn't pinpointed a place to find the water, none of this beautiful, world-famous vineyard would have happened.
He really saw an opportunity and decided that him and his brother were gonna oversee this project along with some investors, and went on to build the biggest and most iconic vineyard here in the valley, which is Stagecoach.
At Stagecoach, we had 17 different varietals of grapes, and by putting them in the right place in that huge vineyard, which is now 1,300 acres of land, the Sangiovese's been wonderful, the Chardonnay's really terrific, the Tempranillo's great. Napa is very special for Cabernet and its relatives, but it can do just as well for Syrah at Stagecoach if you put it in the right rocky, sun-drenched spot. When my son was our winemaker, he created a really great blend out of Tempranillo, Cabernet Franc called the Doctor, and he named it after me. And that's a delicious wine that goes with many foods. And I knew once I tasted that wine that we were making wines as good as any in the world.
So many folks come to us and they don't realize that they've already had so many wines that have actually been touched by Jan. Their favorite wines have come from the grapes that Jan grew, and now they're getting a chance to learn about him and taste his wines. I tell people that he removed 2 billion pounds of rocks from the mountain, and then he crushed those rocks up and he put in the road in and out of 168 blocks of fruit, and he was selling the grapes to about 1/5 of the valley's winemakers.
And as you've seen, there's still plenty of rocks in the soil. The rocks in the soil create really good drainage and help the vines to be somewhat stressed. If they have water, they don't crash, which makes really interesting, wonderful wines. Rocks, water, and the road. And of course, finding enough buyers for all these grapes. At the peak of Stagecoach, we had about 90 different wineries buying grapes. And Stagecoach is going to expand again, and maybe someday there'll be even more.
What was happening back then is Dr. Krupp was selling Stagecoach. Back in March of 2017 is when he closed that sale. And 2 months later, he bought this property here.
When we decided to sell Stagecoach, but still keep most of the grapes like M5 that make our wines so special, my brother and I thought it might be time to buy a winery. And we found this beautiful winery close to my home, about 2.5 miles away. The person who built the winery, he brought a bunch of the bricks and some of the bells and other things that you'll see around the property from Italy. He designed a Tuscan-style winery and a Tuscan-style villa, so it seemed to meet a lot of needs. And having your own winery is so much better than working at somebody else's. Desiree really controls what happens and when happens, which you can't always do at a custom crush winery.
We have an excellent winemaker, knows and studies the vineyard and loves to experiment with different yeast and barrels. And so I think she's passionate. So her wines show that.
2013 is when I was first introduced to the wine. I was working at a custom crush facility that Krupp Brothers brought their production to, and that was my first introduction. I had never met him. I didn't even realize what a legend he was, and I fell in love with the Doctor wine. And then in 2017, they bought the winery. They wanted me full-time, so in 2018, when we did our first harvest here, I came here full-time. Bart Krupp was always my champion in the background, always like, why don't we just make Des our winemaker? And Jan was like, I want to, but I just don't know if she's ready. One of the cab blocks that was still out on the vine just happened to be my favorite block of cab that we sourced from Stagecoach, called D7, and the grapes just tasted amazing to me. It's one of the younger blocks that Jan planted when he still owned it. And so he's like, you love that block. Why don't you just make that wine just like what you would want to do if you were the winemaker? And I thought, great, I can't wait to do that. And so I did that, and him and Bart came in towards the end of fermentation. They tasted it, and they were kind of nodding and everything, and I was like, okay, they liked it. And then Jan and I went to go look at a vineyard, and together we're driving up there. He's like, just so you know, the D7 block is the best cab of the vintage, and congratulations, you're now the winemaker. So it was his way of testing to see if I knew what I was doing.
She was so good and she was so devoted to our wines. She had such a great palate, so I promoted her to winemaker. It's been a pleasure working with her. She keeps an eye on barrels, helps choose what's best for our grapes, keeps an eye on the vineyard here, and looks at Stagecoach carefully for our blocks that we still get from there.
One of our wines that we do, it's an exclusive wine for the wine club, is the Joshua Super Tuscan. It's our Sangiovese cab blend. And in 22, that was my first year as the head winemaker during the biggest heat wave Napa had. And our Sangiovese up in Stagecoach, it's one of the later ripeners in the area that it's planted. Usually Sangio is one of the first ones off the vine. For my taste preferences, I liked it to hang a little bit later so I can get darker fruit flavor. We had temperatures exceeding 115 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days straight. Vines will shut down. Like, they're too hot, they go into hibernation mode. And so they're no longer putting energy towards maturing the grapes. So you're not only are you dealing with shrivel with raisins, but the grapes that haven't shriveled, they're having a hard time ripening. With the heat wave, all the other winemakers picked their rows, and my row is still hanging there. And you're getting nervous because this is my first year as the head winemaker. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never worked with a heat wave. And I wasn't tasting those dark fruit notes, and there was still some greenness in the skin. So I'm like, I'm gonna let it hang. It kept me up all night. Like 3 a.m., I was like, did I make the right choice? That heat wave's coming through. And I went up the next day because I was so worried about it. And sure enough, the grapes that were beautiful the day before had shriveled a little bit, but the flavors still weren't there. And I didn't know if I should make the call to pick. We call it a mercy pick when that happens. It's not what you want, but you got to do it, otherwise it's going to be worse. So I called Jan. I was like, I don't know about the Sangio. Can you come out here and take a look? And he was like, all right. And he went up there and he took a look at the Sangiovese. And then he called me. He's like, I've seen it worse. Let it hang. And so we did. And I actually picked 3 days after the heat wave. And it made a beautiful Sangiovese. And it's one of our best-selling wines that we've done. Jan is always telling people it's like she saved the vintage, which the whole team saved the vintage, but I kind of went by my gut instinct.
Every season is different. Some are hotter than you like, some are a little colder than you like. Even though this is a Mediterranean climate, you can get heavy rains the end of September and October. So tough decision. You pick the grapes before the rain, you let them hang through it.
And then 23, it was a nice cool year, so extra hang time on the grapes. But then the problem with that is the grapes are ripening slowly and you're getting closer to the rain season. usually we're off the vines in October. So we start to think about our blends. I mean, Krupp Brothers, we're small, but we have a lot of different labels that we do, a lot of different blends.
She's so much fun to blend with. I think our palates are pretty similar. Although I hate to admit it, her palate is even better than mine. She can pick out the same smell that I smell in a wine, but she can say gardenia or jasmine. It really clicks in her brain what she's smelling.
I love tasting all the different things that are in wine. Certain varietals give you certain flavors. For example, Malbec, you're almost guaranteed to taste a plum in there somewhere. But where we're located, we get a bunch of other environmental factors. We have the California bay trees that are all throughout Napa, and the wind will blow through those leaves and blow the oil onto the grapes. So you'll get the California bay flavors, which is like cardamom and cinnamon, a little bit of bay, and also that will age kind of into tarragon. And so when you're sitting down, for me, when I'm tasting wine, I am tasting all of those. I'm looking for the berry flavors, the blackberry, that's a given kind of for all our cabs out here in Napa. And then also there's some florals that come through. So it's very interesting to taste these different layers of flavor that's in wine. And I think for a lot of people who love complex wines, like that's why Napa can shine through, is we have all those different flavors.
It's a devotion to quality. So right from the vineyards that I've selected, to the winemakers I've had working for me, to the barrels we use, everything is top notch.
We like French oak because we like to have flavors of vanilla and chocolate in our wines, and also the texture that French oak gives. I'm looking for barrels with my winemaking style. So they're softer in their tannins, they're more pronounced in their flavors, they mesh well with the wine early in its youth. I actually worked with a cooper and I developed a barrel that is kind of Krupp Brothers' proprietary barrel, a rough, heavy toast, open grain barrel. Because we have such strong tannins out here in Napa, you would think you'd want a barrel that was smoother oak grain because it'll make it feel smoother in the mouth. But when you put rough oak with strong tannins, you get this really plush, fill your mouth texture with a rich dark chocolate coming through. And it's become one of our favorite barrels. The thing of it is, I make wine the way Jan likes to drink. And I don't have an ego to this wine. This is his wine. And so I want to make what he wants to drink. But the best thing is we have the same palate. And so I know what I'm making, what I like to drink, is he's going to like it.
When they hear the story, I think there's a connection with people, you know, when they hear Dr. Krupp's story and how he created this big property, they kind of, I think, respect him and connect with him. And then when they try the wines, they fall in love.
When I see the people drinking the wines, and then they come and say, this is great. That's when I noticed, like, Des was doing her job, I was doing my job, Doctor was doing his job, everybody was doing a great job to get these wines to where they are right now.
This is one of the few mom and pop wineries still around in Napa County. And this is a family who didn't have all the money in the world and decided they wanted to get into wine. And because it's their passion, that translates into everything that we do.
Up until recently, my brother Bart was part of the team, and he was very helpful with the business side. He's always been a great businessman. He's taught me a lot. Unfortunately, he passed away a year and a half ago, but his wife and his children have been good partners in his absence.
It's been an honor to tell his story and to just kind of represent who he is and what he's done in the Valley. Honestly, it's really been a life. It's not been a job for me. It's really been a lifestyle. I've met amazing friends and wonderful people throughout the entire time that I've been working. He's been a wonderful person to work for.
We're that small boutique winery that you hear from a friend or a tour company tells you about.
He keeps it small on purpose. So I think just keeping it small so that every barrel is touched. In the vineyard, everything was done by hand. So all the vines get touched so many times during the year. Nothing's done by machine.
Well, I'm excited about some of the new sources of grapes we have. We really love some of the fruit we harvest here at the estate. I'm looking forward to how Desiree works that into our program. She's already done some of that. Just to continue to make great wines as long as I can. And keep enjoying them at the same time.